The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected.
We lose 100,000 people a year, but he should come to Congress, and if he wants to do continued operations on these boats, should get authorization.
The Pentagon rolling out a new counter-narcotics operation targeting cartels in South America. What we're learning about President Trump's briefing on possible military operations in Venezuela.
Secure border saves lives. And one of the reasons no one talks about why we have the most secure border in the history of this nation is because exactly what ICE is doing.
Immigration crackdown, and it continues and possibly grows. What the Border Czar has to say about the next city rumored to be targeted by Homeland Security agents. And then coffee lovers finally getting a break inside the new trade deal that may make your next cup a little easier on your wallet. Good evening. I'm Taylor Murray. Welcome to the National News Desk, America's News Now. Here's a look at the White House, where, according to his official schedule, President Donald Trump will soon be departing, headed to Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland before flying on to Palm Beach, Florida, to spend the weekend. We're going to keep a close eye on if the president speaks to reporters before boarding Air Force One, as he sometimes does, and we'll check back in if he does that. Well, the Trump administration appears to be expanding its war on drug cartels. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins joins us from Washington with more on the Pentagon's new mission announcement and the possibility of taking the fight from sea to land.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Thursday officially launching Operation Southern Spear. The Pentagon says the operation formally puts a name and a coordinated strategy behind its effort to target narco-terrorist networks operating across Latin America. This comes as the U.S. military struck its 20th alleged drug trafficking boat, killing 4 people, bringing the total death toll from these operations to 80.
Look, this is a counter-drug operation. It can stop tomorrow if they stop sending drug boats.
The U.S. has been steadily building up its firepower in the region, including the reactivation of Roosevelt Roads, a Cold War-era naval base in Puerto Rico closed since 2004, and moving the Gerald R. Ford strike group from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean.
The president has made it very clear he's not going to allow terrorists to bring illegal drugs that kill American citizens into our great country.
Earlier this week, President Trump was briefed on potential military operations inside Venezuela.
The Maduro regime is a narco-terrorist regime. They're also a transshipment organization that allows these groups to operate from their national territory. They allow drugs to be shipped. They openly cooperate with the shipping of these drugs towards the United States and Europe.
The White House has not confirmed any plans. Meanwhile, critics like Democrat Senator Tim Kaine voicing strong concerns.
Venezuela has some very significant weapons that they've purchased from adversaries of the United States. And the last thing I want to see happen as a member of the Armed Services Committee and as the father of a Marine is Venezuela to get the mistaken impression that an attack is imminent and start using these weapons against American sailors and troops in the region.
No timeline has been given for how long Operation Southern Spear will last, but defense leaders say this will be a sustained effort. Latin American partners are also expected to play a key role in Operation Southern Spear, and the administration is hoping a multinational approach will limit instability in the region. Taylor, back to you.
All right, Kayla, thank you. Well, not many Americans are on board with the Trump administration's lethal military strikes on suspected drug traffickers on boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. According to a new Reuters poll, fewer than 3 in 10 U.S. adults say they support the strikes without a judge or court being involved. 51% say they oppose the strikes, and the rest say they're unsure. Now, Republicans are also divided on the strikes. 27% say they oppose them, while 58% say they support, and the rest don't know. Attorney General Pam Bondi says the Justice Department will investigate Jeffrey Epstein's connections to prominent Democrats and institutions at the request of President Trump. In a series of Truth Social posts, Trump slams what he calls the Epstein hoax. Trump claims the late convicted sex offender ran with former President Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, and J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, and says they should all be investigated. He insists calls for the release of more files are a waste of time, but the House votes next week on a bill compelling the release of more files, and interest is bipartisan.
It's my expectation that the legislation will pass, potentially pass decisively. Democrats in the House, of course, will strongly support it. We believe in transparency. We believe it's been far too long that this information has been hidden from the American people.
My people want to know who else, if anyone, did Epstein traffic young women to? And if they were punished, how were they punished? And if they weren't punished, why?
The people and institutions Trump name-dropped, along with President Trump himself, have denied they knew of Epstein's crimes. Emails released this week have raised more questions about those in Epstein's orbit, including the president. Well, air travel is finally starting to stabilize after days of disruptions from the government shutdown and severe weather. The FAA announced it's lowering mandatory shutdown-related flight cuts from 6% to 3%. According to FlightAware, around 630 flights within, into, or out of the United States have been canceled today. Around 2,300 have been delayed. Transportation officials say things should be pretty much back to normal after this weekend. Taking a look at Chicago, where nearby 4 police officers have been injured outside the Broadview ICE facility in Illinois. At least 21 demonstrators have been arrested in ongoing protest. Now, this all started around 10 a.m. this morning when protesters left their designated area. Violence erupted when officers tried to hold the line. Border Czar Tom Homan says he supports the First Amendment, but there are limits and consequences for going too far.
Look, they got the right to protest. Have at it. But don't cross the line. I was watching the videos before I came out here. When they put hands on a law enforcement officer, they're getting arrested, going to jail. They have a right to protest, but don't cross the line.
Homan was also asked about reports that ICE agents are coming to North Carolina next. He says he can't comment on actions that have not been taken yet. Meanwhile, North Carolina Governor Bill Stein says his stance on accepting immigration enforcement depends on who is being targeted.
If they were to come here and go find drug traffickers and violent criminals and take them out of this country and deport them, I think they would be welcomed with open arms. The fact of the matter is how they've been operating in Illinois and elsewhere is cause for real concern.
And a correction there. That was North Carolina Governor Josh Stein. The biggest immigration detention center, meanwhile, in California, around 100 miles from L.A., is facing a lawsuit from the American Civil Liberties Union and others. They're accusing ICE of holding people in unsanitary conditions without enough food, medical care, or other necessities. A DHS official denied the claims and said ICE has higher standards than most prisons. An arrest has been made in connection to the shooting death of John Beam. This is the former football coach who was featured in the documentary TV series Last Chance U on Netflix. The shooting happened yesterday in Oakland, California. The gunman initially fled the scene, and no name has been released on who the suspect is. We'll follow that closely. Well, a new prosecutor is reviving the Georgia election interference case against President Trump and 14 others. The executive director of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia, Pete Scandalakis, says he'll lead the case after Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis was disqualified. It's unlikely that any action will be taken against President Trump since he is the sitting president. A new warning from a parents group about the country's largest teachers unions. The group points to language in recent union handbooks. The National News Desk, Angela Brown explains.
The American Parents Coalition is out with a lookout warning claiming powerful teachers unions, the American Federation of Teachers, and the National Education Association are undermining parental rights.
If you're coming from a conservative worldview, this is pure indoctrination. Stick to the 4 content areas and don't get into the cultural issues.
The APC is pointing to the NEA's 2025 handbook and certain segments, including one that cites the existence of white supremacy culture as a primary root cause of institutional racism. The handbook also calls for respect for pronouns. Cedarville University educator Dave Leach says the divide comes down to worldview.
And if you have a worldview that accepts some of the cultural issues that they are teaching on the left, then you are just protecting all of your students and your families, these marginalized students and families.
While at the same time, AFT President Randy Weingarten is firing back. In her new book, Why Fascists Fear Teachers, she argues the real mission of public education is not political. It's about developing critical thinkers.
Our job is to teach kids how to think, not what to think.
Right. As for parents, a 2024 Pew survey revealed 69% of adults say that schools are not spending enough time on core subjects. In Washington, D.C., I'm Angela Brown.
Coming up, double trouble in California as wildfire explodes in the north and millions are under flood watches in Southern California. Then the mysterious death of a New Jersey man now has an explanation. How researchers say a tick bite could be to blame. And with two newly elected Democratic socialist mayors set to take office next year on both coasts, how far left on the political spectrum is the Democratic Party expected to lean heading into midterms? Well, evacuation orders are expanding after the pack fire exploded late Thursday night in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. High winds from an atmospheric river are fanning the flames, spreading them quickly. And more than a dozen homes have been destroyed. Incoming rainfall from a storm off the Pacific is expected to help crews gain control over the blaze today. Meanwhile, that same storm is hitting Southern California, where mudslides and flooding are now the concern. The powerful storm system, again called an atmospheric river, drenched the bay on Thursday. There were multiple reports of spinouts on roads as they flooded at San Francisco International Airport. Weather triggered dozens of canceled flights, more than 100 delays. Forecasters say a month's worth of rain is expected in the coming days, and mudslides are likely in the mountains around L.A. Well, the United States Trade Representative says we have struck a deal with Switzerland.
Going to send a lot of their manufacturing here to the United States, pharmaceuticals, gold smelting, railway equipment. So we're really excited about that deal and what it means for American manufacturing.
The Swiss government says tariffs will be lowered to 15%. President Trump hit Switzerland with a 39% tariff in July after a Swiss delegation failed to secure a deal during talks in Washington. And that was one of the highest tariff rates that President Trump imposed, and the Swiss economy took a hit. Switzerland's biggest exports include watches, pharmaceuticals, and precious metals, along with luxury goods and chocolate. The U.S. is removing tariffs on some imports from South America, according to the Trump administration. A 10% tariff on most goods from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Argentina will remain, as well as 15% for imports from Ecuador. The move is aimed at lowering prices for items like coffee and bananas. The agreement should be finalized this month. Well, stocks on Wall Street fell again today as traders and economists come to terms with the fact that the Federal Reserve may not cut interest rates at its next meeting next month, as many had hoped. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar has more.
The last thing the American economy needs right now is another dose of uncertainty.
See you again soon.
But that's exactly what it got this week as confidence about the future of interest rates took a major hit.
Right now, is an incredibly close call.
That's Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank President Raphael Bostic. He's talking about the calculation the Fed is trying to make. Which is a bigger threat to the economy, stubborn inflation or the weakening labor market?
The risks to both of the mandated objectives make this one of the most challenging environments to try to do policy since I've become a central banker in 2017.
A week ago, the market had 2-to-1 odds there'd be a quarter-point interest rate cut at the Fed's December 10th meeting. Now, it's less than 50-50, according to CME Group. No cut would mean mortgages, credit card interest, any kind of loan won't get cheaper anytime soon. Like Bostic, Boston Fed President Susan Collins does not think a rate cut next month is a good idea because inflation has taken a turn for the worse.
This increase has been driven by rising goods prices, largely due to tariffs, and has more than offset the gradual decline in housing price inflation.
Hiring has slowed significantly, but at least from what they can tell from the latest government jobs data gathered before the shutdown, the unemployment rate was historically low, 4.3%. This is where things get even more tricky for the Fed.
We'll get sort of half a jobs report.
Furloughed workers at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and other agencies means some data is lost to the government shutdown. Former BLS Commissioner Erica Groshin tells me likely the most difficult data to collect retroactively are from surveys sent to households. Surveys sent to businesses should be easier. And next week, we should know more about when and how much data we'll get that was supposed to be released during the shutdown. Taylor, back to you.
The IRS has new guidance for 401k contributions for next year. The agency says the employee deferral limit will bump up $1,000, bringing it to $24,500. And if you're 50 or older, the 401k catch-up contribution limit will bump up $500 to a total $8,000. 60 to 63-year-olds can put in even more at $11,250. Those amounts are in addition to the deferral limit. Well, the nation's first coast-to-coast rail network is moving full steam ahead. The shareholders from Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern have backed the railroad's proposed $85 billion merger. The deal that would connect Union Pacific's western rails to Norfolk Southern's eastern tracks would include more than 50,000 miles of track in 43 states with connections to major ports on both coasts. But the U.S. Surface Transportation Board still has to approve the merger before the deal can be completed. The first death linked to a tick bite red meat allergy known as alpha-gal syndrome has been documented. Last year, a 47-year-old man from New Jersey collapsed and died in his home unexpectedly. At the time, an autopsy ruled the death as unexplained, but now an immunologist at the University of Virginia says the alpha-gal allergy is behind the death after the man's widow says he got sick from eating a hamburger and died soon after. The man's widow also said he had recently been bitten by dozens of tiny seed ticks during a camping trip. The CDC estimates that up to 450,000 Americans may have alpha-gal syndrome. And this research is published in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology in Practice. Well, AT&T will pay customers $177 million in a settlement deal. AT&T was sued after two major data breaches last year involving consumer social security numbers and call records. The company denies it failed to protect people's data. Eligible customers can file for payment until December 18th. A judge still has to sign off on the deal. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in North Carolina, where the government shutdown leaves lasting impacts on national parks.
I'm happy to see the shutdown end. I am concerned about the overall impact that it had for our park.
Carolyn Widener with the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation tells us the government shutdown and the lack of stewardship over the national parks has been devastating.
So there was vandalism, there were impacts, lots of camping in places that was not appropriate, lots of roadside impacts, vehicles up on areas on the parkway that were causing resource damage.
And she says because of a lack of rangers, they don't know exactly how much damage has been done in the park.
And she's just the best grandma that there is.
a grandmother in Clovis is now being hailed a hero.
She pushed my daughter out of the way and, saved her life. If it wasn't for her instinct, that, grandmother instinct, my daughter wouldn't be with us today.
The family did not want to go on camera, but did want to raise awareness about this crash that happened near Reagan Elementary Wednesday.
What's keeping me up at night is thinking that this can happen to anyone. This could be anyone's family member.
Danielle Pierce has a 17-year-old daughter now and says this street has always been a safety concern for her.
We as a family have been reaching out to get a crosswalk put in for years since she was going to Reagan Elementary.
In a warehouse on the western reaches of Salt Lake City, trucks are being packed with food, ready to benefit needy families across the country. It's an effort directly tied to celebrating America's 250th birthday next year.
Thinking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is exactly what this initiative embodies with America Gives.
Rosie Rios is chair of the United States Semi-Quincentennial Commission. A former U.S. treasurer, she now oversees America 250. Rios was in Utah to team up with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The church is donating 250 truckloads of food headed for different communities across the U.S.
Coming up, what the election of another Democratic socialist as mayor of a major city means for the future of the Democratic Party. We'll be right back. The Trump administration has joined a lawsuit looking to stop California from redistricting ahead of next year's midterm. Last week, California voters approved a measure by Democratic lawmakers that allows them to bypass the state law of requiring an independent commission when redrawing congressional districts. Well, now the DOJ says the new maps are being made to prioritize specifically Latino voters, violating the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The first Assistant United States Attorney Bill of the Central District of California said this, quote, "The race-based gerrymandered maps passed by the California legislature are unlawful and unconstitutional." He went on to say, California is free to draw congressional maps, but they may not be drawn based on race. Well, California Governor Gavin Newsom's press office responded on X, saying, quote, "These losers lost at the ballot box, and soon they will lose in court." Well, up the coast from California, another self-proclaimed Democratic socialist wins an election in one of America's major cities. As national correspondent Matt Galka reports, the high-profile wins have Democrats fielding questions about how far left they should go heading into the 2026 midterms and beyond.
And to all of the friends who have...
Seattle's new mayor-elect Katie Wilson didn't shy away from the word socialist during her campaign, and she ultimately won one of the closest elections in the city's history.
I think we're really in a moment now where people care a lot less about labels than they do about results.
Wilson preached affordability for voters while focusing on a housing crisis, homelessness, and public safety, while wanting to raise taxes on high earners. She also wants to Trump-proof Seattle and protect its sanctuary city status, It's easy to see the comparisons between her and another mayor-elect and self-described socialist on the East Coast, New York City's Zohran Mamdani. Mamdani has reportedly spent the last week or so talking to Democratic governors and potential future presidential candidates J.B. Pritzker from Illinois, Wes Moore from Maryland, and Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, seeking advice on how to stand up to Trump. He met with New York's Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul Thursday as she's distanced herself from tax hikes and some of his policy proposals like free buses ahead of her own 2026 re-election campaign.
I cannot set forth a plan right now that takes money out of a system that relies on the fares of the buses and the subways.
Another well-known Democratic socialist, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, claims that even MAGA voters are embracing far-left politics, drawing criticism from the White House.
I can't tell you how many times someone has pulled me aside and said either I was once a big Trump voter and a Trump supporter, and now I've learned and now I've changed and I'm with you.
I can assure you, MAGA Republicans oppose everything that AOC and the modern day Communist Democrat Party stands for.
The socialism label becomes important as the 2026 midterms approach and the Democratic Party tries to figure out how far left or how close to the center to go. Republicans, including the president, have tried to take it a step further, labeling the whole party as communists. Reporting in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
This is pretty interesting. Churches are increasingly using artificial intelligence to connect with their parishioners. That includes AI chatbot apps like one called Text with Jesus that aims to make users feel like they're talking to God. Now, other apps are focused on prayers and sermons, and they're helping these churches answer questions like schedules and events for the congregation. It's all the time we have for now. I'm Taylor Murray. Thanks for joining us.